anyway, my name is Ed Finkler. I have been talking about mental health issues within the developer community for the past couple of years. And this is sort of a little bit of a fork, I guess. Let's use that term. Of the talk that I've been given for the past couple of years, which is called Open Sourcing Mental Illness. So there's not a bit to that in here, but then there's some new stuff, which this is the first time I'm giving it, so I hope it doesn't suck. The first thing to get out of the way is who I am. Like I said, my name's Ed Finkler, you just all saw that jazz. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a developer type. I mostly develop PHP, and I heard you guys talking shit about it, so lay off. I know who you are, and I heard you at lunch. And I do some Python sometimes. I'm a musician sometimes. I got a big nerdy type, so hey, fit right in. Then I also have a mental disorder. I got a couple actually, but I'm just here as a person. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I am not an expert in HR. I'm not an expert in wellness programs and workplaces and things like that. I am certified in mental health first aid, which is the course I took, and I'll talk about it a little bit. But I'm really here to talk about what it's like to have a mental disorder from my perspective, but also to talk about more widely how those things affect us, specifically in the developer community, but a lot of this can be applied wider to other stuff, but particularly in that workplace environment that I'm sure many of you have. I'm going to do a little quick informal survey. If you've seen this talk before, you might have had this. I don't remember if I did it last year. We'll see. So I'm wondering how many of you folks here, you find fellows and have glasses or contacts, you need that. You have some sort of eye disorder that disallows you, and that is almost everybody needs to wear glasses or contacts here. You need a corrective lens. I'm wondering if anybody here has ever asked you, they notice that you're, oh man, I can't see without my glasses. Have they ever said to you, well, could you try harder? Yeah, well, that person was not an idiot at that moment. Yes, not saying they're always an idiot. I gotta be careful. You don't call somebody, well, they're not an idiot. They're just acting like an idiot. Have you ever had anybody, have you tried squinting? I'm actually squinting right now. And it's interesting. We don't perceive it as a crutch or a flaw in our personality. Or in our, let's say, Protestant work ethic, to have to wear glasses. That's a pretty common thing. Everybody experiences it. All right. A couple of things that may be a little more severe. Now, my dad and my brother both have diabetes, and of course, I really like to eat sugar, and so there's a good chance I'll get it too, but I try to be careful about that. But I'm curious if any of you would feel that, diabetes, a lot of people deal with that. It is not typically fatal if treated. People can live pretty normal lives with it, whether they have type 1, type 2. I'm curious, I'd like to see you raise your hand if you would feel comfortable talking about diabetes with somebody you work with. So I would say most people, not everybody. Some people are like, mind your own damn business, work person. But some folks, most folks would kind of be like, it might not be the favorite thing to talk about. But one of my brothers also has cancer. The same brother has type 2 diabetes, he's had to deal with it the past year. He had to have treatments for it twice. Which was super not fun, but thankfully he so far looks like he's finally cleared it. And I'm curious, so cancer, pretty heavy thing, right? Typically I like to make jokes. Cancer jokes sort of don't go over so well sometimes. So this is kind of a heavy thing. I'm curious, please raise your hand if you would feel comfortable talking with somebody in your workplace, and maybe it's not like a complete stranger to you, but somebody who you work with. Talking about cancer. Okay, so I see a few less hands than diabetes, but not that many. Okay, so really a pretty high percentage of significant majority. Now, I'm curious how many of you would feel comfortable talking to somebody you work with about a mental health issue. I'd like you to raise your hand if you would.
As long as it's not my own.
Yes, as long as now that's an interesting thing. As long as it's not your own, that's an important thing. Now, I would say less than 50% were there, and that is an interesting result here, but typical for what I see. Now, how many of you, like a friend or family member, let's just replace that, say somebody who you're pretty close with, like close friend or somebody really, raise your hand, how would you feel about talking about that with somebody you're real close with? So quite a few people. That's good. I've gotten far lower results. So you're all very well adjusted. That's good to see. Well, shortly, I'll talk about my own stuff that I deal with and diagnoses that I have. I have a couple different things. They call that comorbidity, which is terrifying sounding, but it just means you have two things. And I they split up the stuff that I deal with two diagnoses, which is generalized anxiety disorder and then also something called ADHD. And the generalized anxiety disorder, for me, is sort of like you have stress reactions or anxiety about stuff at inappropriate times or for lengths that are not typical, that are sort of not normal. Again, there's sort of this baseline, and then you're outside of that baseline, and then people say, "Oh, well, you have a disorder," right? So for me, it's sort of like I have these kind of anxiety, stress responses. That's the right word. Stress responses, really that are more intense than they would need to be, or for no apparent reason. I also have had physical manifestations of that. Like I get it feels like a knot, like right below my sternum that I can't release. That's really bad. I used to have IBS really bad. Does everybody know what that is? Okay, so you feel like you're going to shit your pants all the time. And I get scared to go to new places, particularly places that I don't feel like I understand the etiquette socially there. And that responds to, like, I don't like to ride public transportation, particularly in places that I don't know, because I'm afraid I'll do something wrong. So it's the thing I always describe it as is like, I have the reaction that a lot of times it's as bad as this. I have reactions about situations and I get triggered by things where it's normal to have a stress response when you are actually in danger. That is a normal human response. So if a lion is trying to eat me, that is a normal response. But it is not normal to have that response if, like, the boss just emails you and says, "Hey, can I talk to you on Monday?" And have that level of, like, holy shit, kind of thing going on. Now, I also have adult ADHD, which I think, it's kind of the same typical things that you think of. I have trouble focusing. I tend to avoid less appealing tasks a lot. But there's a couple things that go into that people don't think about, I think, sometimes. I have a really low frustration threshold. Or the other way to look at it is that I get frustrated really fast compared to a lot of other people. Especially if I feel like I don't understand a task, the frustration it ramps up very quickly. My emotions can be really intense, and I'm really, really good. And this feeds into anxiety quite well. I'm really good at constructing bad outcomes very quickly. So, like, if the boss emails me and says, hey, can I just make sure I want to talk to you on Monday about something? I will construct a scenario in which my family and I are going to be homeless, and within like 5 minutes, and then I will hyper focus on that because that's what my brain is really good at. That my brain is very good at constructing scenarios like that, and sometimes that's helpful. It's helpful when you're thinking about, like, what are the consequences of this application I'm developing. Like, I'm kind of good at anticipating, oh, well, if you let this input in here, that's going to potentially cause a security issue, things like that. It's helpful for that. It is particularly not helpful to have normal responses to something that might be a little bit stressful. Well, these two things really. ADHD and this anxiety disorder really feed into each other for me. And I take medication for it, both of those things. And I take 4 things: Lexapro, Boost Bar, Strattera, and Klonopin. If you really want to hear about it, I can talk to you about it, but I don't think we need to spend a whole bunch of time on it. But I have to take medication every day. Not everybody takes medication every day. For some people, the medication works great. For some people, the medication doesn't do anything. For some people, it helps them with other stuff going on, typically what you call talking therapy or other kinds of psychological therapy stuff. I also do see a therapist, and I see them about every 2 weeks, and they talk about how things are going and why I do the things I do and try to figure out strategies to address those things. There's a lot of good work that's done on anxiety disorders. If you have those kinds of issues, there are actually generally pretty good treatments for it, both medical and psychological, that people have had pretty good success with changing behaviors. But one of the things that's really toughest about this is this feeling, and I've often had this since I was a kid, of feeling alone and feeling not like anybody else. For a long time, I thought that there was something wrong with me because everyone else seemed to be able to cope okay, and I was the weird one, and essentially I felt like I was not able to exist in society and be productive. And it was deeply frustrating and deeply isolating. And that is really, really hard. But I didn't have people telling me, oh yeah, this is actually really common. I didn't have that. And I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD or an anxiety disorder until I was much older. I was in my late 20s, early 30s. Was diagnosed with depression, and I do have bouts of depression, but I think they come about because of the anxiety. And then you feel like, especially, you feel very isolated, you feel very alone, and I felt like I was broken and I was never going to be right because I behaved a certain way and it seemed like I was incapable of existing in society. And that is so isolating. That loneliness is so crushing, and that's one of the reasons why I started talking about this. I was just talking about the kind of experience that I had because I felt like, and what I heard back right away was, oh yeah, I have that feeling too, from tons and tons of people who were afraid to talk about it. So that was interesting, and I think says a lot about the stigmas that we have. But I wanted to get a little bit into how that affects us, and not just talk about me, but talk about how these kinds of, how mental disorders, and whatever label you want to use to discuss this kind of thing, but basically your brain kind of works in a way that is oftentimes not productive for you in society. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Most studies that you see, they'll say this in the US, but numbers are pretty similar across the world, really, is that 1 in 5 adults have a mental disorder in any 1 year in the United States. That's 20% of people. That is an enormously high amount. If you think about the people that you know have a mental disorder, you will say to yourself, that's not 20%. Well, that's because nobody fucking talks about it, right? Nobody says anything about it. Anxiety disorders are the most common. Depression is also very common. But you're talking about 20% of people. That's a very high number. The level of disability, there's this World Health Organization study that came out in 2004. They talked about the global burden of disease. In fact, I think that was the name of the study. They talked about a bunch of stuff in it, but they talked a lot about psychological stuff, psychological disorders, and they did a comparison of level of disability to try to give people an idea, because they have an idea of what a lot of purely physical disorders, the kind of disability you have, but we don't often have a feel for what we call a mental disorder, what kind of disability level that can bring about. So an interesting comparison, I think, was in this, they compared moderate depression. They felt that the level of disability they experienced was similar to multiple sclerosis or severe asthma, both of which we know are physically quite disabling. And severe depression, they're similar to quadriplegia. And if you think about one of the classic symptoms of depression is this, what they call motor retardation. It's this feeling that you don't want to get out of bed, you don't want to move, you don't want to do anything. That is not something that's just in your head. Your brain is telling your body not to do that. And that level of disability in the way that it impacts your ability to do things is similar. Now, again, this they talk about disease burden, and this is a metric they have, which is basically premature death plus years lived with a disability in this World Health Organization study. And In that, they found that the burden of mental disorders was the largest of all disorder categories in North America. That's more than cardiovascular disease, that's more than cancer, more than anything else, any of those large conditions. To a quote from that, again, that same study. In all regions, neuropsychiatric conditions are among the most important causes of disability, accounting for around 1/3 of years lost to disability among adults aged 15 years and over. That's a large amount. I think we can talk a little bit about the economic costs. Some of this stuff is not going to be surprising, but I think some of the numbers are interesting. So mental health conditions are the second leading cause of workplace absenteeism. Workers with depression lose about 5.6 hours a week to disability. They lose productive time. And that compared to that, workers without depression, again, we're just talking about depression here. We're not necessarily talking about, that study was about that. I can tell you as an anxiety disorder, I lose plenty of time because of my anxiety disorder and my ADHD productivity. Only 1.5 were people without depression. General numbers, this sounds big, it's big because we're talking about the entire country. This is all in the US. That 43.7 billion in absenteeism from work, about 200 million days lost productivity and direct treatment. That's how hard that hits. And one of the things people keep asking me when I was doing this talk before, the open sourcing mental illness talks, they kept asking me, well, what do I do about this? Well, I'm giving you these numbers because I want people to understand how severe it is. And if we simply look at it from the standpoint of, well, how does it impact work? How do I convince people? Well, start looking at these numbers. People don't work because of it. We did this survey in August and September of last year, mental health and tech, and got survey results out of that. Now, this culled from this is just folks who are in the U.S. and who are not self-employed, because self-employed people have a whole different situation about how they seek out health care. And it's just people in the U.S. because our healthcare system, works differently. Everybody's country is different, and ours is different than others. But there's a number of things that I'll show you out of this, and basically a bunch of different questions. What are the results we got back? So the first one is, do you feel that your employer takes mental health as seriously as physical health? And the numbers that kick out from that, yes, was about half. 25% said no, 25% said don't know. I want you to remember that there's the differences between the no and don't know as we discuss about this stuff, but generally half of people say, I don't know, or hell no, they don't. Another one, do you think that discussing a health issue with your employer would have negative consequences? Physical health, you're talking about 3/4 of people say no. Would not have a negative consequence. Maybe 19%. I guess it depends on the job a little bit. But we're talking about developers. Let's look at mental. No is only 1/3. Maybe and yes is about 2/3. So there's a perception out there. Whether or not it's true, there's a perception out there that there are going to be negative consequences for discussing it. And discussing what is identified by the World Health Organization as the largest cause of disability. That's interesting. How many of you, let me ask you, how many of you are a supervisor or even something as fancy as a C-level executive? Let's use fancy words like that. All right, raise your hands. Do you supervise anybody? Anybody at all? Okay, so you folks are going to get a mouthful from me about it, because there is a great deal of burden upon you to change workplaces and make them safe. And unfortunately, it falls upon you because you have an incredible amount of influence over the quality of life that the people who work under you have. So I'll keep discussing it through here. Would you bring up a health issue with a potential employer in an interview? I've had many people talk to me about interviews and how that affects it and how they would talk about this stuff. Physical. Well, there's a lot of people who don't necessarily bring it up, you know what I mean? But 40%, maybe 12%, yes, they'd bring it up. Maybe they don't have anything. I don't know. Maybe, I guess it depends on it, With mental health, it is an astounding hell no, I would not talk about that. Yes, it is illegal to discriminate against somebody on the basis of a mental health issue unless it completely invalidates them, makes them incapable of doing the work. The same way that, well, yes, we have a job and it requires you to carry around 50 pounds of equipment, like if you're a sysadmin or something like that. Well, somebody who cannot do that is disqualified from the job, so somebody who doesn't have that capability. But otherwise, it is illegal to discriminate against people for that under the Americans with Disability Act. The expectation is that people would not discuss it because they fear that despite the fact that it is illegal, they are not protected and they would not get the job. That seems very common. The research that I showed, and I don't have numbers for that, is that most of these are higher amongst women than men, although we had far fewer female respondents or people who identified as female. But in general, that is the case, that women were more concerned about those kinds of things and felt more fear about that. Do you know the options for mental health care that your employer provides? For only 40% said yes. 27% no, or 32 said no, not sure is 27%. No, not sure is kind of the same thing in this case, I think. And also underlines what an incredibly poor job most organizations do of telling people about what is available to them. In the United States, the workplace is the primary conduit for health care. If you don't know what you can provide, how are you going to get help? And one of the things I hear most often is that people don't want to get help because they don't know what the options are. And that is another roadblock, another thing that keeps them in that inertia of not getting help. Does your employer provide resources to learn more about mental health issues and how to seek help? Yes, 26%, only about a quarter. Again, 20% of the people that they employ are dealing with this issue at any given time. 1/5 of their workers. And employers are only they can only say a quarter of the time that they're getting that kind of information. How many of you have health care through your workplace? How many of you can say, I know what mental health care resources are available to me through my workplace? I'd say that's probably pretty close to what we see in the survey, too. Is your anonymity protected if you choose to take advantage of mental health or substance abuse treatment resources? I asked substance abuse. Substance abuse is categorized typically as a mental health disorder. There's a lot of comorbidity with that, too. So, not surprisingly, I don't know a lot of people who have gotten addicted to something because they had an awesome life and their brain worked great. So in general, there's something else going on. That's my personal belief, but I think you see a strong correlation between those two things. The vast majority of people don't know. They just don't know. 30% yes, that's pretty good. No is 2%, and I've certainly heard horror stories about stuff like that. I had a story, I gave a talk, and somebody told an anecdote, one of the people who was in the audience told an anecdote about, this was not a tech job, but she was sitting there and the boss was just railing on him and yelling about a few different things, and looks at her and says, "Don't you think I don't know that you go to see a therapist?" In front of everybody. I like talking about these things openly, but that should be my decision to talk about it openly and not anybody else's. And the law says that too. What he did was wildly illegal, and she could have sued the company. How easy is it for you to take medical leave for a mental health condition? This gets asked a lot. What I hear is people mostly lying about it, saying that they're sick or they have a doctor's appointment or things like that, or they're non-specific about what's going on. How easy is it? There's some numbers, very easy, somewhat difficult, very difficult. The vast majority don't know because their organizations don't tell them because they don't talk about it. The fact of the matter is that sick workers don't work or they're significantly less productive. We saw numbers to bear that out. And that is sort of the bottom line if we just remove it from hey, let's just be nice human beings and try to help people have better lives. The fact is that everybody is less productive if they are sick and don't get help. And what we see is that people in the U.S. and outside, the responses we got from outside, is that most people don't know what resources are available to them and don't know if things will be anonymous or not and are scared to talk about it. Only 41% of people in the U.S. with a mental health disorder receive professional help. So there are resources out there, they just don't get the help. And most of us are probably in a position, given that tech and programmer-related stuff is a career that generally goes pretty well. We're pretty damn lucky compared to a lot of folks who don't have the skills that we do. There are resources available to you, but most people don't take advantage of them. They don't get help for that kind of thing. Half the people, again, we're just talking about depression here, but half the people who seek help for depression wait 8 years or more. And the longer the delay, the more difficult the recovery is. Surprisingly, if you wait and let something fester, it does not get better. If you just sit there and say, I'm just not going to deal with my depression, I'm not going to deal with my anxiety, I'm not going to deal with this even though that is interfering with the things that I want to do in my life, and oftentimes your brain is telling you not to do it, but the longer you go with it, it does not get better, it gets worse typically. So the longer the delay, the more difficult that recovery can be. And people with mental health problems, there is good evidence that they're more likely to seek help if someone close to them suggests it. And I think as a group, more than many other careers, I think that the people who do development work, who are programmers or work in these kinds of fields and do this kind of work, tend to identify more with their careers personally than other folks. I hear some people say, when I've discussed this issue, I was discussing with my therapist and she said, hey, well, my job is kind of a thing that I do so that I can do the things I want to do. And I think, this is anecdotal, but I think that is not the case for me. This is the thing I want to do. And I think a lot of people feel that way. So the workplace, I think, we identify so strongly with it, and I think the people that are in our workplace have so much influence over what's going on in our lives. Not completely, but it has a great deal of influence. And I would say more so because of the way we identify than in some other careers. So that's some heavy stuff. And we want to talk a little bit about how to make our workplace safe here and talk about some recommendations. Because people kept giving this talk and people say, okay, so what can I do? And I said, I don't know, there's a couple things. So I have these 5 points and we can talk about that, and I hope that we have a little bit of discussion about it after that. But the first thing, and I think the most important thing, is that you get buy-in from a C-level, your CEO, CTO, whatever. I'm curious, how many people work for a company here that has over 500 employees? So a fair number, but not the majority. So the rest of you, less than that. How about less than 100? The smaller the organization, you can have more influence over it, by far. So getting buy-in from a C-level, what does that mean? Well, it means that in most organizations, the things that you value and the things that are important, they trickle down from the top. That happens in nonprofits, that happens in, and most of our social structures, I'd say. Most of the social groups that we organize with, that's kind of how that happens. Particularly in organizations that are hierarchical. The things that value, the things that are important to the people, say, at this bottom of the pyramid, well, typically, because if they're going to participate in this organization, they need to take on the values of the people who are at the top. There are pluses and minuses to that. But the fact is that if you really want to do this, you need to get buy-in upon the importance of it and the significance of it and the impact that it can have, and it is having. You need to get buy-in from the people who are there. Those are your founders, those are your CTOs, those are your CEOs, whatever you want to call them. You need to get that. So that is, I think, a key thing. Not as easy as we'd hope, and so that can be maybe a little bit discouraging, but there's also something I say, if you work in a smaller organization, you probably have a chance to talk directly with people that you might not have otherwise. The second thing, and I would say that's really, really important, is that you take mental health first aid. And I strongly recommend it for all supervisors and managers in a group. I say that because it is the single biggest thing you can do, and the best thing you can do, to understand how to interact with people who are either in what I would describe as a mental health crisis, or just dealing with a mental health issue at any given time. I've taken this course, and I've been dealing with my own issues for 25 plus years, and there were plenty of things that I learned about what to say, what not to say, how to approach things, the kinds of stuff you want to have available to you at the time you go to approach somebody, how to be prepared to have these kinds of talks. Essentially, it teaches you how to interact empathetically in an understanding way that's going to be most positive and be most likely to encourage a person to seek out help. It is real cheap to do in the U.S. Most of the places, it's well under $100. I paid $50 to do it myself. And you can go to, again, mentalhealthfirstaid.org. You can go on there and you can check out in this area. I looked up, there's a place in Nashville that teaches it. There's probably multiple instructors in this area. But in pretty much any area you go to, you're going to run into somebody. It's actually taught in 22 different countries. The programs vary a little bit, but it's pretty cheap. And oftentimes places will pay for it. And I'll say that you're going to use this way more than normal traditional first aid. It is just enormously helpful. And I really believe strongly that anyone who supervises folks, anyone who manages teams, needs to have this kind of training. Because if you don't, you're not going to understand how to interact with folks in a positive way. You're not going to be prepared. And the fact is that people who you work with are dealing with it right now. You just don't know it because they don't present as sick. I don't present as a person who has these things. But I do. And I talk openly about it because I made that choice, but the vast majority of people don't. A third thing is no local resources. And one of the things that's interesting about this, and I think it's oftentimes a challenge to folks who work a lot in programming and use the internet a lot and expect that there is some massive universal database that if I just type something into it, I will find exactly the information I need to get resources. There is no Yelp for mental health resources. It does not exist. And if you pull it off, you would change the damn world with that stuff if you figured out how to do it. The fact is that this stuff is not tracked well, and there are lots of local resources that are available but don't end up in, say, any kind of national database. There is a national database that the government provides, and I can't remember the name of it, but if you bug me about it, I could probably find it. But it is a listing, essentially, of just licensed healthcare providers. It does not list things like Mental Health America, or your local chapter of Mental Health America, or National Association of the Mentally Ill, or things like that. And a lot of those places provide resources, discussion groups, training opportunities. Those things aren't listed in most national resources. You have to go to those places. So what you really have to do is you go and identify who knows what's going on in your area and what resources are available. In my area, where I live in Lafayette, West Lafayette, in Indiana, it's Mental Health America there. And I call up the people at Mental Health America and I say, I need this kind of thing. What can you tell me about who to talk to about this stuff? Like, I called them just the other day. We need training in this. We need training in HR stuff that is related to that, and also we need mental health first aid training. What do I do to make that happen? That's what you got to do. It has to be a real boots on the ground thing. And I know that we get a lot of folks who aren't from Nashville around here. You're going to have to figure it out on your own. You're going to have to call around. You're going to have to find it out. But I would start with looking at NAMI.org, mentalhealthamerica.net, and look for local chapters in there, and then call them and just ask them and say, this is what I'm trying to do. Can you point me in the right direction? And they would love to hear from you, because the whole point these organizations exist, the whole reason they exist, is to help you. That's why they're there. But again, there is no Yelp for this. It would be awesome if there was, but there's not. It just doesn't work that way. You can't get an app on your phone and figure out what to do. You got to know your coverage. Health insurance, obviously, there's lots of ups and downs, back and forth with that. People need to know what is covered under whatever health plans they have available to them, whether they are insured through themselves or through the workplace, which is the most common thing in the U.S. One of the things that's important and was brought up to me by somebody when I was showing them these slides is that it's important to not assume that what does she call it? One mechanism of knowledge is going to work. A real common thing is that, we did one training seminar or whatever, we sent out an email, and then, we educated everybody. But it doesn't work that way. People don't just, a lot of times they ignore stuff or they don't remember or things like that. So you got to kind of hit it in multiple ways. You got to post stuff up in the lunchroom. You got to send out emails. You have to have regular reminders of those kinds of things. You have to get face-to-face with people as much as you can and talk to them about it. So you teach it on multiple levels from multiple sources. It's important to do that because there's going to be people you miss if you don't do that. The fifth thing is really actively engage and educate. So one of the things that we saw so much in the information that we got out of that study or that survey was that so many people don't know. They don't know what their coverage is. They don't know if they're protected. They don't know if they're safe. And what that means is that your employees don't have the information that they need, and that contributes to the stigma of not discussing these issues. That makes it more likely that they're not going to want to talk about it, because those unknowns are are really, really good at instilling fear in people. So you need to actually engage your employees and talk to them about it, and talk to them again in multiple ways. So you go out there and you don't single people out or things like that, but you say, these are the resources available to us. Here's what you can do. If you're having something that goes on, you can come talk to me and I will help you with it. But also, here's this sheet and you can go talk to them yourself. You just need to call this person, or you need to email them, or things like that. Here's a listing of all of what we cover in our insurance. Here it is. If you don't know that stuff, you're not doing your job. And it bears out that we are not doing our job in terms of making this available to people and making sure people understand what's available to them. And again, so you don't rely on one mechanism in the same way. You talk to them in different ways. If you have opportunities to bring people in, most places like Mental Health America, they would love to come in and talk to you guys about this stuff. And they might charge you a little bit of money, but it's way less than I guarantee you're paying for anything that's like, say, software as a service metric systems or anything like that. You're paying way more for your chat room crap than you would to have somebody come in and talk to you about this. An order of magnitude less. So you teach it on multiple levels. You teach it from multiple sources. I think the key thing is we can't keep not talking about this. We cannot stay silent. And I'm reminded of, I grew up in the 80s. I was born in 75. I grew up in the 80s, and I remember the AIDS crisis in the United States in the 1980s in discussion. I said 1980s like 75 times. So ACT UP New York was a group in New York that came up with a slogan that says silence equals death. And they were talking about the AIDS crisis. And that was pretty literal. That now we sort of in the U.S. tend to perceive AIDS as something that is going to be a controllable chronic condition. But at that time, that was something that just flat out killed people, and we didn't really understand why, and there was a lot of fear about it. A lot of people said that we shouldn't talk about it because it associates us with homosexuals, or it associates us with drug addicts, or things of that nature. There's nothing that makes people less likely to try to seek help and to try to talk about and try to get help and try to change things than stigma and the fear that there's something wrong with you because you have this condition. Well, it's not as directly, morbid as HIV, but I think that it is just as harmful to not discuss these things. And I believe that's the lack of discussion that we've had about these things is why it's in the position that it is now. Why we feel that there's a reason to be afraid to talk about it, despite the incredibly high numbers of incidents in our population. And in fact, not, I think, getting any lower anytime soon. So what I really need you to do is I need your help talking about this, sharing what you learned here, learning more about it, to talk and to email and tweet and post and go to your C-level or go to your direct supervisor at least and say, I'm not okay with this, and we need to make a change here. Because if we don't, maybe it's not me who's the one who's suffering, but I guarantee you 20% of the people who are working for us right now are dealing with this. And we don't know who they are. It doesn't mean we have to, figure out who it is and identify them. But they're suffering in silence and probably not getting help based on the numbers that we see. So if you want to change that in your organization, that's on you. So you got to step up and you got to talk to people about this. Talk about it publicly. You don't have to talk about your own personal situation, but you can talk about this general issue. And it is a widespread issue. It is easy, very easy to find evidence that backs up this is something that we should give a shit about. Believe it's not, I do not try hard. And we find tons of stuff. So talk, email, tweet, post, do it now, please. If there's anything that I've shown here, if there are these URLs and messages or words or tips that I've given you, please do something about it. Just please share that. And I want to thank a couple people. They are not people who are here, but Camille Wilson and Joanna Wu both helped me with this, making this a better talk. They both helped me quite a bit, and I think they're going to continue to help me because they're actually professionals in these kinds of areas, HR and psychology. So I want to thank them, but I want to thank you for listening. You can check out more stuff. All my talks are recorded up on Funktron.com/OSMI, or you can go to a website, osmehelp.org, that I do. And that's what I got for right now. So, thanks. We have time to do a little bit.
Questions? We got 15 minutes.
Okay, we have 15 minutes. Yay! Does anybody got a question? Hey, look at that.
First of all, I want to ask you if it's okay if I ask you a question reflecting on something that you shared personally about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I've clearly overshared.
Yeah. You said that in addition to this anxiety and ADHD, sort of a product of them feeding off each other was this depression on off.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that the presence of the depression is slightly more due to the fact that I don't want to put this in sort of a victim scenario or a reflexive scenario, but
Okay.
For lack of a better phrase, you waited a long time until these became identified as ADHD and anxiety.
Yes.
Do you feel that leads to a higher?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. In no uncertain terms. And I would say, I was dealing with this stuff when I was a kid. Pre-teen, I was dealing with this stuff. And it wasn't identified, and I didn't get help. I was a kid who kind of cried real easily. I was a kid who got freaked out by stuff. So I was having issues with this anxiety disorder when I was a little kid. And what I learned out of it was that, and I got bullied a lot when I was in junior high, to the point where I went into an inpatient mental health hospital for about 2 months. That dramatically impacted how I felt about it and the psychology that was related to that. In some ways that was positive, in some ways it was negative. But I certainly, and this is, what I learned about it was not, it's okay, this is a common thing. I never learned that. I learned that on my own when I was much older. But I was not taught that. I would say things are a little bit different now than it was, say, 25 years ago. But, that was just sort of the environment I was brought up in. So yeah, absolutely, not treating it, yes, it is absolutely worse. And it's worse because I didn't deal with it sooner. Absolutely, 100%. Yeah. Sorry, oh, hey, you have your hand up high, sure.
I have a very difficult situation. I have a lot of difficulty reconciling this.
Okay.
I have a colleague and a close friend of mine who is absolutely and completely brilliant. He's contributed to open source projects that everybody in this room uses,
Yep.
and he is amazing.
Yep.
He also has mental issues at a level of severity where he's had to be involuntarily committed
Yep.
more than once.
Mm-hmm.
This genius gives him this unique burden where he can do so much, but he's not engaged by small, trivial projects.
Yep.
He needs to be engaged by work that's challenging.
Mm-hmm.
But he recognizes how cyclical these issues can be.
Yep.
And so he's very much, he wants to be responsible whenever he does something. So he doesn't want to be on the critical path for any project that he works on or anywhere where he is employed.
Mm-hmm.
He's deadly afraid of throwing himself into something
Yep.
and doing an absolute bang-up job, and then suddenly he can't support it or
Yep.
or he can't do that. And there's this conflict here because for the work that he's, with all of this talent, all of this skill, everybody outside wants to engage him. They see how he can be used
Yeah, right.
to better all the things that we're working on. But at the same time, he also faces this internal conflict where he wants to do that kind of work, but he also is afraid that he can't, he's not supported.
Right.
And I have great difficulty as a friend, and also a colleague, and also having worked with him, trying to figure out how to reconcile this.
Yep.
How to really support him in a way where these two can come together.
Yeah. You're supposed to phrase that in the form of a question, but I'm just fucking with you.
What do I do?
What do you do? Yeah. Well, yeah, right. That's very good. I can't answer it super well. I mean, there's only so much you can do. I mean, I've talked to people post somebody successfully completing suicide, the guilt that they feel about that, and plenty about the frustration of dealing with somebody who has really chronic mental health disorders, and how deeply frustrating that can be. The stuff that I deal with is simple compared to somebody who has a psychosis or something like that, or really has incredibly severe. I've figured out how to deal with my stuff okay. It's very, very difficult and can be very frustrating for the people around them, the loved ones, and people who just interact with them, to understand and to keep going and to keep being as positive as they can in the situation. I guess there's two things about it. The first thing is that you have to remind yourself that you cannot make anybody do anything. That is a difficult thing to remember when you're like, why the hell did you do that again, man? We've been down this road 20 times, and man, I've been that person who's done it 20 times, and again, and on a not the same kind of level with some folks, but it's deeply frustrating, and that's to be acknowledged, right? It's not easy. It can be a matter of years to get some people to get any kind of help, even as much as you keep encouraging them, as much as you try to be a positive, empathetic, influence in there. Now, I would say that that's not the one caveat in this discussion that we're having here. That is not the norm in terms of your numbers that you see. It does not mean that it's not important, particularly in your case. What I guess I would say is if you're talking with folks about, well, what do we do about mental health stuff and things like that, the vast majority of people, they can get some help, and it really does help them, and they're in good shape. So if you're talking about numbers, most people are not in a situation where it's like that. Now, I guess what I'd say is, first off, just in general, I really think the mental health first aid stuff helps. And it may help you and other people engage better in ways that are helpful. But I don't know what his situation is in terms of, is he seeing somebody regularly? Is he getting treatment? Does he take his meds if he takes meds? Does he see, my therapist's opinion is that if you're not seeing somebody every 2 weeks, you can't do the work. Now, it varies. I have anxiety disorders. That kind of sounds like that's probably not what he's dealing with. But you have to kind of do it and keep it up. But things change too. It's a tough thing. people have to stay engaged with their treatment, and they have to be actively engaged with their treatment no matter what. So if with chronic conditions like this, it's one of those things where you can't kind of drop off of it. And so but that's really tough. I'm not a professional, but I mean the people that he needs to be talking to are mental health professionals. And that needs to keep happening, right? And as much as you can do, you can encourage that, right? And there's lots of things you can do to make it more likely that percentage-wise somebody does that. Well, you take the course. I'm not kidding. It cost me $50 and it took me a day. And I learned a ton about how to interact with folks. That's why I really think it's the strongest thing you can do. And they will teach you how to do that. And you can say, I've got somebody who deals with X issues, and this is what it's like. And that instructor should be able to say, oh, well, okay, these are the kinds of things you need to deal with. Well, these are the kinds of things you might experience, and you got to keep that in mind. I'm not an instructor, but I did take it. But it's not something I could summarize in 5 minutes, right? I can tell you in general what you're trying to do, but they go through role play sessions, you see people interacting, it helps a ton. So if that is something that's impacting your life a lot, and particularly if you're supervising people or you just interact with people and you're kind of project managing or things like that, it is enormously helpful to have that. So I would really highly encourage you, I'm not sure, where are you located?
New York City.
Yeah, I've been told that in New York City you can actually take it for free. I don't know who provides it, but I've got a friend who lives there and looked it up and said, yeah, you can get that. There are going to be tons of places that you can take this. So just go take a day and take it. And I believe it will have a significant impact on the way that you can interact to help. It's not going to solve all your problems, but I think it's going to help. So, yeah. Were more questions? Okay, please go ahead.
You mentioned that your mental health issues manifested when you were younger.
Yep.
Do you have any specific recommendations for how to interact with younger people if you notice this or if you're concerned about it? I suspect that most of these issues start when you're kind of younger.
They do and they don't. It really varies. Like psychoses tend to manifest later on. Like you tend to manifest after you're, say, 18. So it can vary a lot, and it can also vary based on it can vary a lot. Do I have specific recommendations? I think the key, there's a lot of stuff I can't recommend because I'm in no way qualified to tell you that, and it would be irresponsible of me to do so. What I would say is that there is nothing embarrassing about going to see somebody and get an evaluation done any more than there is of getting a physical evaluation done by a standard medical doctor. So if you think maybe something's going on and you're kind of worried about it, go get an appointment and get an eval done. That's what you do. Your insurance will pay for it. And they, as a professional, they should be able to tell you, yeah, I see this and this, and maybe this is something you should worry about. Or they might say, I don't know, it looks cool to me. That's what I'd say. Is that I think if you take that fear out of it, there's no reason to treat it like it's some huge thing, rather any more than if you have a kid who, it looks like he kind of limps, or maybe he doesn't hear so well, or like when I'm right next to him, it seems like I have to yell or things like that. You just get that stuff checked out, right? It's not a big deal. And it's really common. I mean, 20% of the population deal with something. So, and that's adults. But if I had that done and it was treated as if, hey, this is something that we need to work on. Now, I did start seeing a therapist when I was 13, but I was in the middle of really, really deep shit, and I didn't have. It was beyond what I could do there. If I had gotten treatment sooner, probably would have helped. It would have helped me in terms of knowing that it was okay that it was like this, and probably figuring out ways to sort of deal with stuff. And so that would have been helpful a lot. At the same time, that was in the 1980s, and people treated stuff differently. So I think the big thing is there's no harm in getting an eval done. It doesn't brand you with something. It's just a normal thing. Like I go to the doctor once a year to get a physical done. My wife's an RN, it makes me. But this is what you do. So it's not a big deal. You're just getting evaluated. They do a little bit of testing. It's fine. It's not traumatic or anything. Yeah. Can I do one more?
One more.
All right, one more. Okay, go shake your. You had your hand up before. I'm sorry. So, and you can talk to me after about this stuff. But yeah, please go ahead.
A comment and then I don't know if I have a question, but in San Diego, it's up to us. The community mental health government organization has banded together with all the local organizations to really do a PR campaign to break down stigma, to provide different segments. Like there's 5 different subsegments, but we have military people coming back from deployment, post-traumatic stress.
I want to add something to that.
And
There's a stat I saw about vets. Vets are less than 1% of the population in the United States and account for 20% of the suicides.
right, and
That's-
it's just a personal comment. I have complex post-traumatic stress from childhood trauma.
Yep.
And the seeking help when, even if it is like having asthma or something else, it's something that needs to be managed on a regular basis. And I'm going to put one plug in for the code of conduct because a lot of times code of conduct people think, oh, it's because, people are whiny or this or that or the other. And, there are somebody with post-traumatic stress really doesn't need somebody coming up to them, behind them, jumping on them, whatever. It has real issues, male, female, whatever gender you identify with or not. And I think the education piece and having the message out there, presenting the resources, whether it's on your company's website, flyers in the bathroom, whatever, the more different ways you can get it out, the healthier company you're going to have in general.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So thank you for doing
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. Like I said, I think all that's correct. And I think that, codes of conduct are not just for, leering men, leering at women, and that's part of it, but it has a lot to do with making people feel safe, and that's what I'm talking about here. And there's lots of times I don't feel safe, not for necessarily the same kinds of reasons, but same kinds of stuff. That feeling can be pretty similar. So yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think that's all the time we have for stuff right now. I'm going to be around here for a while if you still want to hit me up.
Are you going to the after party?
I don't know, where is it?
At Emma.
I might, probably not, because I'm exhausted.
Okay. Maybe tomorrow you'll be around?
Maybe we'll be around. No, I'll see. Maybe I'll start. We'll have to see how that works. We'll figure that out. If you want to get a hold, why are we having this discussion right now?
But you said you were going to be around.
Yeah, but I will be I'll try to stick around here for a while. I've got cards. I have. If you want to listen to our podcast, which will probably offend many of you, it's called Development Hell that she talked about. I have stickers for that. You can get stickers. So yeah, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. If you got more questions, just hit me up. Thanks.